And good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Upstate Orange Podcast, recorded live inside the FingerLakes1.com studios in downtown Seneca Falls, New York. It's Thursday, December 12th, 2013, and tonight we're going to be talking about how strange it will be when Syracuse faces St. John's this weekend in Madison Square Garden in an out-of-conference game. We'll talk about the Orange's big win over the Binghamton Bearcats, and we'll have some great Syracuse trivia and much, much more. I'm Jim Sinacropi along with my co-host Matt Verkey and our resident college basketball guru via telephone in Cincinnati, Brad Connor. Good evening, Brad and Verk.
Good evening, Jim and Brad.
How you doing, Brad?
I'm great. How are you guys tonight?
Pretty good, pretty good. It's the holiday season, feeling pretty festive. Syracuse is undefeated and ranked second in the country. I mean, things are as they should be.
Syracuse going to the Texas Bowl.
That's right. That means they get 3 more weeks of practice, and I tell you, I like Scott Schaefer. I know it's a basketball podcast, but Brad, give me your impressions of Scott Schaefer.
He's hard-nosed.
There you go.
It is what you can say about Scott Schaefer. He's got an energy that he's brought to the program that I don't know if Doug Marone brought the same kind of energy. I like what I see from him. I think there's good things coming.
I like it. You a Schaefer fan, Verk?
Yeah, they came around. They made a bowl this year. He did all right.
Well, the Upstate Orange Podcast is brought to you by Generations Bank with locations in Auburn, Geneva, Phelps, Seneca Falls, Union Springs, and Waterloo. Be sure to check out their new mobile banking app or check them out online at mygenbank.com. And Seneca Meadows Landfill, responsible waste management for the next generation. Learn more by watching their videos at senecameadows.com. And by Midday, Miris, and Ricky, your hometown personal injury attorneys. If you've been injured and deserve compensation, call the Finger Lakes Personal Injury Hotline at 315-568-0911. And you can check them out online at middaymirisricky.com. All right, fellas, we're perfect at 9-0. We're going to MSG. Let's talk about it with our big 5 questions. Okay, question 1. St. John's, Sunday at noon in Madison Square Garden. They got the best shot blocker in the country. Brad, say the name.
Chris Obekpa.
Obekpa. There's some consonants in there that shouldn't be where they are, but what do you think? Are we going to do anything different offensively to account for this guy in the middle?
I don't think so. They don't throw the ball into their centers very often as it is. So, I don't think Syracuse has to make a ton of adjustments. Obviously, they got to look out on drives. They'll be coming over from the weak side. And, one good thing with aggressive shot blockers, the guards might get in the lane. They have to dump it. When he comes up, dump it to a big guy, and hopefully they can jam it. But, we don't throw the ball inside to our centers too much. You got to be aware of him, and it's it's always in the back of your mind when you're going against a great shot blocker. But I don't think Syracuse is going to change their game plan too much.
What do you think, Brad?
Yeah, I agree with Matt. The Syracuse offense has never really been predicated on pounding the inside, and I don't think that it will be a huge factor. Last season, Obekpa was the leading shot blocker in the Big East as well, and he had 1 block against Syracuse, and Syracuse won by 20. So I don't think it will be any different this year. I think the one guy who could be limited a little bit is Jeremy Grant, because I think his slashing game, he could run up against some resistance inside with Obekpa, but CJ Fair is going to do the mid-range thing as well as anybody in the country, and he's not going to be affected by a shot blocker that's standing down on the block, really.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. We do what we do, and we're not going to change it because they got a big guy in the middle, and like you say, Verk, we don't dump it down. We go to the basket, but in this case, it'll be Tyler Ennis or maybe Cooney taking it to the hole, and they'll find somebody open. I mean,
Coleman and Christmas and Keita, they miss shots against 6'6" guys, so I don't think it's going to be any different for them missing shots against this great shot blocker.
All right, I like it. Let's move to question 2. And this is kind of a question that might get us reminiscing a little bit. How strange is it to be playing in Madison Square Garden against St. John's as a member of the ACC? Because to me, it's really hitting home now. The ACC Big Ten Challenge was kind of the first time we were representing the ACC, but that was at the Dome, and it was against Indiana. But we're going to Madison Square Garden, and we're not a member of the Big East anymore, and we're playing a Big East team in St. John's. And I think St. John's has a lot to play for just in that regard. They want to, kind of defend the Big East banner, and I'm sure they don't like it when we say we're New York's college team and when half the fans in MSG are Syracuse fans. So, for me, it's very strange. This is kind of the first ACC shock that I've kind of trying to work through. I don't know, Verk, what do you think? Does it feel different to you?
It does a little bit, but I think when once the ball gets tipped and they're going up and down, it's St. John's, Syracuse, and we're only a few months removed from being in the Big East, so it does have a little different feel. Being obviously it's a little earlier than they would usually play, and going in as a non-conference game, it feels a little different. But I think when we're watching the game, it's going to have the same Syracuse St. John's feel that they've had over the years.
What do you think, Brad?
Yeah, I agree. It's as much as we've had 2 years now to get used to the concept of Syracuse being in the Big East or in the ACC, with the exception of the fact that it says ACC on the foul line at the Dome and they've got ACC on the back of their jerseys. It doesn't feel like we're truly an ACC program yet.
Yeah, I think it will when we head down to Georgia Tech and then play on the road at Clemson. And
yeah, when you're knee deep into the conference season and it's there's 3 feet of snow outside and you're playing conference games and you're playing ACC teams instead of Big East teams, that's when it's going to feel like you're truly an ACC team. But right now it doesn't feel like we're truly representing the ACC. I realize we did in the ACC Big Ten Challenge, but it doesn't feel like it's any different right now, with the exception, like Ferg said, that it's early in the season to be playing a team like St. John's. It's ordinarily a game that you would see on a Sunday afternoon in February.
Well, before we move on to question 3, I got kind of question 2.5 here, and I figured it'd be nice to kind of reminisce a little bit about our favorite St. John Syracuse memories. And the reason why is I think that anybody listening to this podcast that's underage, maybe even 35 or 30, doesn't remember how good St. John's was. And in the early 80s, the pecking order in the Big East was Georgetown, St. John's, and then Syracuse. And I actually have more bad memories of losing to St. John's than I do losing to Georgetown during those years. It seems like we had a tough time beating them. We lost in the finals of the Big East Championship when Walter Berry Black Pearl shot. We got rolled in the Dome the year that the Big East sent 3 teams to the Final Four. And, one memory that I have of St. John's, I was at the Dome in that year when Chris Mullen and Walter Berry led St. John's, into the Dome, and they just blew us out. We stole the head of the mascot. I remember that. But I remember Chris Mullen on a breakaway. He bounced the ball about the foul line, off the court, off the backboard, and then one hand slammed it. And I thought that was pretty impressive. But I remember it like it was yesterday. I was probably 10 years old. I was probably 12 years old. But
I don't remember that.
Well, you're a couple years younger than me, Verk. What do you remember about St. John's?
Just those great teams. I remember the Mullen, Walter Berry, Mark Jackson, Willie Glass. That's it. And you know what kind of surprised me is how mediocre St. John's has been since. Through the 90s and 2000s, they have not been very good.
And there's been times when you thought maybe they're going to break through because they got a couple really good recruiting classes, and it's almost similar this year. They got a really good team this year, but they lose to Penn State.
Yeah. When they had Felipe Lopez and Zenon Hamilton, Ron Artest, they're good.
Malik Sealy,
they're good players that recently haven't stayed around very long. And an Artest and Eric Barkley, some of those guys.
Even, yeah.
I don't think they've had a player drafted in like 10 years.
Yeah, well, they got Lavin coaching, and he had the whole, the he had cancer and had to,
They've had some scrappy teams, some good teams. Remember they went and beat Duke a couple times. They seem to play Duke a bunch of times, and they've had some pretty decent teams, but they just they haven't made a run in the tournament or done anything. It's when you really think about their location for them to be so mediocre. That's what kind of stuck out to me when I was kind of looking at some of their records and stuff.
Sure. What do you think, Brad? What's your memories of St. John's?
It's funny with the old timers, I guess, like ourselves. We have this kind of window of memory of St. John's, like you guys are saying. It's mid to early to late 80s. There's about a 6 to 7 year span where you remember St. John's very fondly, with a lot of talent, a lot of success, Final Fours, Lou Carnesecca, the sweater.
And you were scared to play
him and Thompson came out with the same sweater that Carnesecca wore for like 20 straight games, and he was busting on him, and that was a big deal. Obviously, we remember the '86 Big East tournament in Madison Square Garden, and Ron Rowan and Walter Berry blocking Pearl, and those aren't great memories, but they do stand out. I do remember a regular season game in the Garden where Pearl had like 35. It may have been even that same year. I remember, I think it was 84, and Syracuse beat them twice in overtime. Both times it was overtime, and because there were always battles back then. But like Merck said, since then it's been pretty dry, really, for that rivalry, if you want to call it that. Just because they've had decent talent, but they've not had sort of that breakout type team that's contending for Sweet 16, Elite Eight, Final Four even.
They never seem to be able to put a season together. They always shoot themselves in the foot before conference play even starts. And they, like I say, they did it again this year. They lost to Wisconsin, and I think by 12.
Wisconsin's good.
That's
obviously.
fine, but then they lose to Penn State in overtime, and that's the kind of loss that kind of puts them well outside the top 25. When really you look at the roster and you think they should do better.
They had the guy who went pro last year and got drafted pretty
Stevenson,
high.
right?
No, what's his name, Brad?
Mo Harkless.
Mo Harkless.
Oh yeah, Harkless.
He's their first one in a while, though.
Yeah, probably maybe since our test.
And he only stayed freshman year,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's the kind of thing. They've had talent, local talent, but they may stay for a year or two, and that's all they get.
Our test was crazy at St. John's. He was a gunner. He was just.
They had Barkley. They had the New York City kids. Barkley, I think, was there 1 year with our test, and.
But that team didn't do anything either.
No, not really. They were fun to watch, but.
Well, remember those teams with Felipe Lopez and Hamilton? I mean, those were two of the most talented guys they've had since the Mullen years, and they were never able to do a whole lot consistently.
No.
Well, let's move on to question 3. And last week we talked a little bit about Mike Hopkins signing with an agent and wondering, geez, that means he's probably going to be taking off sometime here. And Lazarus Sims went down to Binghamton. And so right now we got, Hopkins, Autry, McNamara, Boeheim's, all his own guys are going to be on the staff. So who's next? When a spot opens up, what former player do you think would make a great assistant coach for Syracuse? I got one in mind, but I'll let you guys go first. Brad, what do you think? Did I stump you on this one? I changed the script late. This question wasn't in the original script.
You caught me off guard.
Well, I'll go first then. I'll tell you my guy.
Yeah, what do you think about this one?
It's Scoop. I think Scoop Hardeen is a good choice. He's probably would make a really good recruiter. He was a point guard that was there for 5 years and really excelled his senior year and became a leader. And he just seems to fit that mold of a guy you might have on the staff, an Adrian Autry or
I thought you were going to say Eric
Lazarus
Devendorf.
Sims. Yeah, we'll bring in Devendorf. Yeah, maybe we can bring him on as a mentor to players off the court. But I think it would be Scoop. Maybe a guy like Jason Hart.
Yeah,
a little older.
And Jason Hart's coaching.
Is he?
He's at like USC. I think now he's an assistant coach. So I'm sure at some point he might be on the staff. I was thinking, and Andy Routins. He's still playing. He's young, but there's a guy who kind of didn't play a lot first couple of years and worked hard and. End up being one of the better shooting guards ever play at Syracuse when he left Syracuse. So, there's a lot of good guys out there I think would make great assistants.
Got anybody yet, Brad?
I think Brandon Trish might be a decent candidate somewhere down the road once his playing days are over. I think he seemed like a pretty cerebral player and a guy who was pretty well respected by the guys around him. I think he might be a good candidate. I'd love to see Lawrence Moten on the bench. He's getting more involved with the program now. I think he was very very prominent around the team in the Final Four run last year. I'd like to see him get back to the program.
I see him at the Dome all the time.
John Wallace.
Yeah, what about Wallace? What do you think?
He's always around.
Yeah. I don't know if our boy JW wants to do the work of an assistant.
Yeah.
I don't know if he'd want to at this point in his life do that. I think it would be a younger guy trying to build a career, and that's why I think Scoop fits the mold. Andy Rollins was a good one too, and I didn't even think of Trish in that light, but I'd be surprised if a spot opened up and Boeheim didn't bring in a former player.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So.
I think that's the model he's going for, and guys that know the zone and know how to teach that zone, because that's obviously the key to success for that program nowadays.
And I think he's found it good for recruiting. I think when you got former players, out there trying to convince a high school kid to come, what better way to sell it?
Yeah, you can work out with Jerry McNamara, and look what all those guys. Look what they all have good careers, and
they can speak from experience too. They're guys that actually did play in recently. So Red Autry maybe not so much. I used to ride the bus from South Campus with him back in the early '90s, but he spent some time at Virginia Tech, and he's a key piece of Boeheim's staff for sure. So let's move on to question 4. You mentioned Brandon Trish. Brad, I got a question for you guys, and it's a question that we probably wouldn't have believed we could even ask, preseason. But I'm going to ask it right now. Who would you take at shooting guard right now, Trevor Cooney or Brandon Trish? I'll throw it up to you guys.
Brandon Trish.
How about you, Brad? You think you stumped?
Agreed, Brandon Trish. I'd say Trish was a better rebounder, and he could always create his own shot. When things broke down, he could get to the basket. He could create something. It wasn't always a great shot. It wasn't always a success, but you could always count on him if something broke down. I don't think Cooney's there yet. I think he's pretty reliant on the guys around him to get him the ball where he needs it.
I remember Trish being pretty frustrating, though.
He was a guy who left you wanting for more because he had so much talent, so much athletic ability, and there was times he kind of disappeared. But there's also times I thought last year where he carried the team. I don't think Cooney's a guy who, like Brad said, he needs a great point guard with him. He needs great guys around him, and I think Trish can do a little bit more, on his own, and as far as getting his own shots off and things of that nature.
Good defense, great athlete. I mean, obviously they went to the Final Four, but
4-year starter, great career.
It'll be an interesting question to ask.
We'll see. Yeah, I mean,
2 years from now when Cooney's career is done, who had the better career. Because obviously appreciate Brandon Trish, but like you say, Verk, he kind of left. You never felt like he really, did everything he could or really blossomed into, the player he could have been.
And he can play the point, which
that would help.
Cooney can't. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I got to go with you there too. I got to go with Trish because just for that aspect alone, we
he was a starting point guard when he was a freshman,
and we would have. Obviously, if Trish was here, maybe he would start over Ennis at point. Who knows the way Boeheim does it? But certainly Benajay wouldn't be forced there. But nonetheless, let's move on to question 5. We're number 2 in the polls right now. That's a great spot to be, number 2. Would you prefer to be number 2 right now, or would you, if we could be number 1? I mean, I guess it doesn't matter too much, but I kind of like being number 2 for a little while here. Like, Arizona can keep winning, maybe we'll keep winning, and
I don't really personally look at the rankings all that much right now. It's tough to tell who's good and who. You look at a team like Kansas. I thought they were the best team in the country 3 weeks ago, and now they can't seem to get out of their own way. And it's early. Having that number 1 ranking is pretty cool, and we had it a little bit last year. Was it? Last year we got ranked number 1 for a little bit, and it's a cool thing to say, hey, we're number 1. But I don't think at this point you want to be in the top 5. You want to be lingering around. You want to be in the talk for that number 1, number 1 seed. So as long as we stay in the top 3 or 4, that's fine with me. Being number 1, that's just up to the voters. But
I watched Arizona play last night on the Pac-10 network against New Mexico State, or who was I
they
can't
tore
remember.
them apart.
It was close for a while. They kept them around 10, 12 points for much of the game. And then in the end, they just kind of roll away. Arizona's big, athletic.
You got a great backcourt.
Got a great coach,
Pretty good
too.
front court, yep.
But I still would like, if we played them, we'd beat them.
Oh, obviously.
Well, they'd struggle with our zone. What do you think, Brad? Any merit to being number 1? Should we be campaigning for the Cuse to be number 1 right now?
Heck yeah, we should. Why not? Why not be number 1? This team always battles for national respect, and maybe we just have an inferiority complex as fans of this team.
No, it's true.
But it always feels like this team never gets the respect they deserve for whatever reason. Boeheim's a whiner and a choker or whatever. It's a long history that we're not going to have time to get into. And would a Duke fan resent being number 1 or not want to be number 1? No, those guys want to be number 1. They want the target on their back. They want to take everybody's best shot. I think this program should expect the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to be number 1 because you're the lead story on SportsCenter whenever you play and that type of deal. But it doesn't really give us a better shot at winning a national title. But I will say this, and I've had this argument with a lot of people who will say, well, Duke has this many championships, national championships, and Syracuse isn't on that level. But what? The thing about college basketball, and for recruiting and for the fans, the real action happens, in February, late January, February into March. And if you're a top 5 team in that time of year, you're an elite program. Especially when you do it year after year like Syracuse has, because you're the one that's on TV all the time. You're the one they're talking about on SportsCenter and on Sports Talk Radio. And that's when, as a college basketball fan, you get to enjoy a lot of your success and see a lot of great games. When March, and even when, look, I love national championships. I wish we had 3 or 4 of them. But as a college basketball fan, when that Final Four ends and that championship is crowned, it kind of just drops off a cliff. You talk about it for a day or two and then it's over. But the competition and the excitement of February and March is what I really enjoy. So if you put yourself in that top 5, through that stretch of the year, it's a lot of fun. And so yeah, I agree, Brad. I want to be number 1, but number 2's fine. Number 2's fine too, as long as we're up there in that top 5 like we've been. I think that it's time that people are starting to look at Syracuse as an elite program. But like you say, Brad, why is Arizona number 1 and we're not? Just, why do they perceive them to be better than us? I bet you if you look at statistically what we've done defensively against other teams and kind of, stack it up that way, that we do have a claim to number 1, I suppose. But, why would Arizona just automatically get to be number 1 and we get number 2? It's a respect factor, and it seems like every year, like we started out this year number 8 or 9 preseason. Now we're number 2, so it looks like we were underrated. We won the national championship. We started the year unranked.
Yeah, and there's always this perception. Syracuse never leaves home. They play a cupcake schedule, and it's the narrative that follows this team every year, whether it is legitimate or not. Syracuse went all the way to Hawaii. Well, they didn't play anybody on their home court yet. That's the narrative now.
Right.
Syracuse and a handful of other teams haven't played anyone on an on-campus site on the road. They only play neutral site games away from home.
And even this game against St. John's.
That's the one way that they can cut this program down a peg, and it just seems like that always happens every year. And when you're number 1, you get the benefit of the doubt a little bit more, even though those narratives still exist.
Yeah. Well, like I say, it doesn't really matter, but I'm just glad we're in the top 5 and want to stay there. And, year after year after year, it seems like it's become. And so now we go down to St. John's on Sunday and we play another home game on their home court. according to the and it's kind of true. But hey, we've kind of earned it too. It's not our fault that so many fans turn out in New York City for us. I mean, the St. John's is.
But look at what Kentucky did when they played Baylor in the Cowboy Stadium. That stadium was much more Kentucky than it was Baylor.
Sure.
Yeah.
But Baylor, it was technically a Baylor home game. They outsourced it to Dallas. Kentucky has the same kind of rabid following that Syracuse does. Does Kentucky get punished because they're not playing a true road game there? No.
No, as a matter of fact, they lost, and let's not forget who beat Baylor. It was the Cuse.
Yeah.
So when people say, I've heard that, I say, well, Syracuse, Brad, I think you've even said it. You said, that Syracuse doesn't have the quality wins that Arizona has. And, that's true. Arizona did come east and beat Duke. But, we also beat Baylor in Maui. And here's a team that beat Kentucky, a team that was number 1 preseason.
It's a better-looking win now, that's for sure.
Yeah, and Baylor, they don't get a lot of credit they deserve either. I mean, they've had what Scott Drew's done there, taking that team from where they were with a murder on the team and all that kind of stuff.
That's true, yeah.
They made the tournament I think 3 times in the history of Baylor basketball. And now they've made it 3 of the past 4 or 5 years. They made a run to the grade 8. They won the NIT, and he doesn't get a lot of respect, but he recruits well and he fights hard, and he's done a great job down there. So
we got a noon start on Sunday against St. John's. Then we got High Point at home 5 days later on December 20th. That's another ESPN3 game. And then we got 8 days off for Christmas, and we come back with Villanova in the Dome, another one of these Big East, old Big East situations there. We're going to look forward to that. That one's on CBS, at 2 p.m. start. Then we got Eastern Michigan, who picked up a nice win last night. I can't remember who they played, but
I'm not sure.
Oh, jeez. Should have put it in my notes. But that's an ESPNU game at 3 o'clock on New Year's Eve. So that's kind of a weird one. And then we start the ACC schedule in 2014 when Miami comes to the Dome. I think that's a home game. So one other quick news bit before we take a short break. Malachi Richardson makes his decision tomorrow. It might round out our class of 2015. So, keep an eye out for him. I hear it's between Indiana and Syracuse. Villanova is an outside shot. He was in the Dome when we beat Indiana, so there you go. Choice should have been made there. But we're going to step aside for 60 seconds, come back with some Connor's Corner trivia, our list of the week, our national power rankings, bold predictions, and after we pay some bills.
We hold on to the things that really matter. Welcome to Generations Bank.
Hi, I'm Jody Torrio. If you're like me, you've got stuff lying around the house that you want to recycle, but you're just not sure how, like broken toasters, vacuum cleaners, or microwaves. At Seneca Meadows, we have a drop-off for those. Bring in anything with a cord, and we'll make sure it's recycled properly through our partnership with 2TRG. It's that easy.
And welcome back to the Upstate Orange podcast on FingerLakes1.tv. Had a tough time putting this show together. We played Binghamton. We haven't even talked about that game, and there really isn't too much to talk about there. We pretty much rolled. CJ had his 19. Cooney continued his hot shooting. 5 of 9. Just blistering. And the freshman got some run. So,
B.J. Johnson struggled.
Well, that was my bold prediction. We'll get to that in a second. But, yeah, B.J. Is a gunner who just can't seem to hit his target. But luckily we don't need him this year.
Well, I think we were talking about, this was kind of, we'll see what the bench does and if they're going to earn any playing time, and I don't think they did.
Well, Patterson looked really good, and we could use him.
Patterson earned himself some time. I thought he looked nice.
We could use ourselves some Patterson and
where though? For who? Where's he gonna fit in though? Benajay played good too.
I would think that when one of those three guys is in foul trouble, that you might see some Patterson. I can see Boeheim going to Patterson instead of Benajay, maybe for defensively. I like the way Patterson moves in that zone. Or maybe if Benajay's struggling with some smaller guards and one of the guys is in foul trouble. But yeah, obviously I think the rotation's pretty much set. But if anybody's gonna pop in there at this point, it looks like it would be Patterson. So, but hey, Brad, got some trivia for us this week?
I do.
Good.
I've got one quick hitter, and then I've got a different one I spent some time researching. But the quick hitter, you were talking about the games that Syracuse has coming up here over the next 2 weeks or so. Two of the former Big East foes, St. John's and then Villanova. It made me curious, and so I looked it up, of who Syracuse has the better record against in their history, St. John's or Villanova. What do you guys think?
That's a tough one because early on I think St. John's had the edge, but in the early 2000s, Villanova really had our number with Jay Wright. And, Villanova had some great teams in the 80s too.
Yeah.
What?
I'm going to say we have a better record against St. John's.
I'm going to too because how many times in a row have we beaten them now? 150?
Yeah, that's a good call. So it's funny because that era in the 80s of St. John's being very strong in the Mullen years and they more or less dominated Syracuse for a 4 or 5 year stretch, and ever since then it's pretty much flipped. Syracuse is 50-37 against St. John's. They're 38-32 against Villanova. So a decided edge against St. John's.
How many? When's the last time St. John's beat Syracuse, Brad? You got that there?
No, as a matter of fact, I don't. I can look that up, but I don't have it in front of me right here.
Come back to it.
It's been a while. I'll look it up here.
I can't remember.
We'll come back to that. But the broader theme that I came up with, we talk about this team right now being 9-0 and undefeated, and the topic came up last week of when do we think this team's going to lose their first game. So I went back into the archives and tried to understand what was the latest point at which Syracuse lost their first game. Can you guys tell me, first of all, what's the
I think it was the Roughton
they've
team.
had without losing?
Roughton senior year was the team that went the farthest without losing. Is that right?
Roughton senior year, so that was 2011, and that would be incorrect. No, Roughton senior year was 2010, and that's incorrect. They were 13-0 that year.
Last year we went pretty far too.
I'm thinking, yeah.
Were we 17-0 maybe last year? 16?
How about during the Coleman years, Brad?
So I'll tell you, last year Syracuse lost to Temple.
Oh, geez,
in
yeah.
December. So
yeah.
they were 10-0 when they lost
Forgot
that
about
game.
that one. En route to the Final Four.
Coleman years were they had double-digit victories before they lost their first game, but none of them were record-setting.
It was within the last 5 years, right? One of the last 5 years, we pushed it to 16, 17-0.
It was in the last 2 years.
So obviously 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Scoop senior year.
20-0. 20-0 with Scoop and
20-0. Wow.
And Waiters, those guys. 20-0, lost to Notre Dame.
Remember
got suspended.
Was that after Wes Johnson, though, right?
That was after Wes Johnson, right? So it was, it was the year that they were number one in the country for a long time, and then
it's the year after Wes Johnson
they
left.
went out to Notre Dame and lost that game
without Fab Melo. That team was different without Fab Melo. Everybody didn't think Fab Melo was that big of a deal, but defensively, we were really tough because
who backed them up?
Fab Melo, was it Baikita? Christmas
came in after Fab. Christmas was a freshman, and I went to that game after they lost to Notre Dame. They played here in Cincinnati, and Christmas had a nice game. He had about 10 points, 8 rebounds, and filled in very well after he was just kind of getting his feet under him in the Notre Dame game, and there was no chance for him there.
Yeah, that game wasn't even close.
Yeah, but it was
20-0 is pretty good start.
But yeah, they went on a nice run even after that and won 10-11 straight after they lost to Notre Dame before they lost the Big East tournament to Cincinnati. And then the Elite Eight lost to Ohio State for three-loss team. But
that was their year. That was the team, man.
And of course the Onawaku. But you remember that loss to Ohio State? We didn't have Fab Melo.
Nope.
It's kind of it's so frustrating. Onawaku gets hurt. Fab Melo gets suspended.
We lost to Butler, right? When Onawaku got hurt.
Yeah, we beat Gonzaga, and and then had a shot against Butler. Didn't play very well. Even without those guys, we were still, made a nice little run. But it's very frustrating, as a fan to see such great teams, not be able to go at full strength into the tournament. So
20-0 was the best start to a Syracuse season 2 years ago. True or false? Syracuse has gone into the month of February undefeated.
False. Es falso.
That is true. In 2000, Syracuse went until February 7th, and they were 19-0 when they lost at Seton Hall.
I remember that loss. I didn't think it was February, though. Wow.
Jason Hart and Tom Thomas and those guys, and they lost in the Sweet 16 to Michigan State that year.
In a road game, basically. I think we played that game
in the Sweet 16. That was ridiculous, yeah. Here's the funny thing about that game, you guys. Syracuse, on February 7th, Syracuse was undefeated 19-0. They were ranked 4th.
Wow.
How could you be undefeated in the month of February and not be top 3?
Well, they didn't play anybody, obviously, and no road games. They'll play everybody in the Dome.
Right.
What the heck? Who's
that? Hart, Eton Thomas?
Blackwell?
No. Was it? Yeah.
Was Ryan Blackwell on that team, Bram?
I don't believe so.
It's after him, I think.
2000.
Might have been. He might have been there, actually.
Jason Hart. Damone Brown was on that team. Yeah, Blackwell was. Shumpert was on that team.
Blackwell's a basketball legend, a legendary coach in Japan.
Yep.
Section 5 guy, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've played with Ryan in Empire State games. Good guy, real good guy.
So give me some more guys on that roster. Undefeated into February.
Tony
that team.
Bland was on that team.
Before transferring to San Diego State.
Preston Shumpert, Deshaun Williams. Alan Griffin was a junior on that team. Clark Duaney was a freshman. Billy Seelick was on that team. Jeremy McNeil.
Wow, so the freshman on that team eventually won the title in 2003.
Yeah. They're building the framework that year.
Josh Pace? Or was he the year? That was the year before he got there.
No, he should have been there. He was a senior in 2003.
Who was that?
Josh Pace?
Josh Pace was not there.
So Pace was a junior in 2003?
Pace was a sophomore in 2003.
Oh, really? He was such a key component.
Yeah, he never started. He was 5 points a game, something like that. But he was the first forward off the bench. Edelman would come off as the first guard, and Pace, and then McNeil.
Well, I think this team can push it deep into. Well, Verk's bold prediction last week was we're going to be undefeated when we face Duke, and that's February. And really, you got Villanova,
Carolina,
and Carolina are the two big tests. Not to say that St. John's Sunday won't be a game. I think it'll be competitive, but. If we can get through December, then we hit the ACC schedule.
Yeah.
So in Boeheim's 37 years, once they've been undefeated into February, 13 times they've been undefeated into January, and 9 times they lost their first game in November. 4 times they lost their opener. Do you guys remember the last time they lost their opener?
The last time was when the year after the national title, we lost to UNC Charlotte in the Dome.
That's a good call.
Then the time before that, we lost our opener. I know we lost an opener in North Carolina in Springfield. In the Hall of Fame game.
Yeah, it was long before that. That was one of the 4 times they lost their opener. So you just named 2.
And the other 2 were probably going back further than that. No, there's some in between.
One you should know.
I'm blanking out here.
2003.
Oh, yeah, no kidding. Lost to Memphis in the opener. Carmelo had 33 or 29, something like that.
Yeah, he had 28, 29, and yeah, they lost to Memphis.
Hmm.
And then they also lost 1995 to George Washington. That was a game that was in Manly, wasn't it?
That's right. They moved it to Manly, and I don't think they've done that since.
I can't now.
Yeah, that's right. Good. I remember both those now that you mention it. So those are the 4 times we lost an opener, and 33 times we won. And they haven't all been cupcake openers. You know, some have been preseason tournaments and whatnot. But the UNC Charlotte game was unbelievable. You know, expecting big things out of that team, and we gave up like 109 points that game or something.
One guy hit like 9 threes, I think.
Brendan Pavlich, I remember that guy. Went crazy.
Well, that's some good trivia, Brad. Is that the extent of it tonight?
Yeah, one fact I was going to throw out there: 15 times in Boeheim's 37 years have they had double-digit wins before their first loss. So 10-0 or greater, and 4 of those, the last 4 years, they had double-digit wins. 10-0, 20-0, 18-0 3 years ago, 13-0 the year prior, and then there was a stretch in the 80s where 6 out of 7 of those years they had undefeated records or double-digit victories. So 10-0, 13-0, 10-0, 13-0, 15-0.
Well, honestly, I thought this year we're going to be hard pressed to do that. With the pretty difficult preseason schedule going to Maui, brand new backcourt. It's kind of surprising actually to find ourselves ranked number 2 and undefeated. But when you watch those games play out and you see how good how much Cooney's progressed and how solid Tyler Ennis is as a freshman and how good the defense is, it's not surprising. But looking at the schedule back in late October, and I would have been tough to, with any confidence, predict we would have got to 10-0. Actually, we're not there yet. We're 9-0.
Factor in is the fact that this team never loses in Maui and never loses in a challenge.
Yeah, that's true. But we're 9-0, so we're not there yet.
No, got to win Saturday.
Sunday. All right, Brad. Great trivia as usual. Now let's move ahead to the list of the week. I just wanted to. We've already done it. Kind of name some of the great St. John's players of the past, but what's your all-time St. John's lineup? We'll go point guard, shooting guard, forwards, center, and 6-man, and then I'm wondering how that matches up against maybe Syracuse's all-time team. And so let's start at point guard. Is it Mark Jackson? End of story.
Yeah.
Gotta be.
Yeah. 4-year player. I mean, they have, you throw out Omar Cook or an Eric Barkley, but they didn't,
Boo Harvey.
They didn't do the things Mark Jackson did over his career.
Yeah.
Felipe Lopez played some point. He was a big point guard back in the day, but no, he was not the driver of that team like Jackson was. Pure
point guard, and obviously an incredible NBA career and coaching, Mark Jackson. So Mark Jackson's the point guard. Shooting guard, is Chris Mullins a shooting guard, right? He's not a small forward. We're going to put him at shooting guard, or no? Because Mullins in there.
When I first did this, I had Mullen. I bounced in between shooting guard and small forward, but I finally landed a shooting guard for him.
Yeah, I think that's where we got to put him.
That's where I'm going. Shooting guard, Mullen.
Okay, now so that means that the small forwards, where we might have some discussion. I got Ron Artest, even though he played only small forward, and a lot of that has to do with the career he had after St. John's. If you're trying to field the best St. John's team of all time, I got Ron Artest at small forward. I don't know if you guys agree with that.
Personally, I'm partial to Malik Sealy there.
I am too. I like Malik Sealy.
Rest in peace.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He was just a great scorer, classy player. I loved going against him. I thought there were some battles between him and Lawrence Mote and Coleman. Those guys, I think they had some great games back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Okay, well, I'll give you guys Sealy. It's small forward. So we got Jackson, Mullins, Sealy. Power forward, Bill or Walter Berry, right?
That's a no-brainer.
He was a Naismith Player of the Year.
The year after Mullen won it.
So, got to be Walter Berry. Didn't have much of a pro career.
No.
Surprisingly.
No.
So no arguments there.
He was a top 5 pick, I believe.
Is there even anybody else?
The only thing about Barry is he's a 2-year guy because he was JUCO, so he didn't have as long a career at St. John's, and they couldn't build up as many of the great games. Although there's just the one that stands out, unfortunately for us.
Is there anybody else at power forward that could even be considered?
I don't think so.
I can't think of many.
Not off the top of my head.
All right, so that brings us to the center position. Obekpa. You got to go Bill Wennington.
I was going to go Zendon Hamilton.
Well, that's not a bad one.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, Bert.
You guys are going Hamilton over Wennington.
Yeah,
Look at their stats.
Wennington was... Yeah, I don't think he brought as much to the table, Wennington.
Great NBA career. Part of the three-headed monster center in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
I think that Michael Jordan helped make his NBA career a little bit shinier.
Well, okay, so we got Zen and Hamilton. So that's actually good because if we didn't do that, we would have 4 of our 5 from the same all played together, in the early 80s. So we got Zen and Hamilton. How about 6-man? I had Seeley. Obviously, he's out. Would you guys put Artest as 6-man?
Sure, I'll take Artest as the 6-man.
I'd say Felipe Lopez.
What about...
He could score the ball. What's funny, though, he was a better player probably as a freshman than he was the rest of his career, but still a consistent, 16, 17, 18-point guy all of his entire career.
What about Willie Glass?
Willie Glass was a nice player.
He's another one on that team.
Yeah, I'll give you that. Felipe Lopez, he was a superstar. The thing is, the Seeley and Lopez teams never did anything.
True.
No.
But like you said, we talked about earlier, that's been St. John's MO in this past 20 years. But, okay, so now we put an all-Syracuse team together, and we don't have to debate here. I mean, point guard, Douglas or Washington, I'm going with Sherm.
Greatest college point guard ever.
Yeah, I mean, Pearl is a legend to Syracuse fans, and it's kind of, when you first throw that question out there, who's the best point guard, a lot of people will say Pearl, but like you say, Douglas holds the assist record, and the fact that Douglas followed Pearl and led him to a Final Four is kind of unbelievable. A guy that wasn't recruited, by anybody. He wanted to go to Georgetown. They didn't even recruit him. And leading all-time assist leader, NCAA assist leader. All right, we'll go with Douglas. Shooting guard, Jerry Mack, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I think almost Andy Routens towards the end of his career was, given Mack, you can't compare their careers, but I think Routens' senior year, he had I'd almost take him with his height, and, his senior year is phenomenal, I thought, but I would go with Jerry McNamara there.
For the clutchness alone. So we got...
Well, I think McNamara had a better career, over the course of 4 years. Than
no doubt.
The national title.
As a freshman, and then he set out that year, got stronger, and that was probably the best thing for him. But obviously McNamara came in from day one.
Let's not forget the first half he had against Kansas in the championship game.
Right.
Small forward got to be Carmelo. Only 1 year, but got to go with Carmelo, right?
I'd agree with that.
This was a tough one for me.
What you got, Todd Bergen?
All partial to Carmelo because of the championship, but I could almost see John Wallace, although he's more of a power forward. I would like to slide him in this spot.
Billy Owens?
A four-year guy.
We just kind of discarded Billy Owens at the shooting guard position. Would you want to put him at small forward? We talked about shooting guard. We mentioned Andy Routens and McNamara. We didn't even mention Billy Owens.
He's more of a small forward.
Yeah.
So who are we gonna put at small forward? Billy Owens or Carmelo Anthony?
I'd take Carmelo just based on his NBA career as well.
I think you got to go Carmelo. Billy Owens was.
I would do it differently. I would go just looking ahead here at the 4. You had Derek Coleman. I would go John Wallace. And I have Derek Coleman play the 5 for me.
Coleman did play a lot of 5.
I'd put Coleman and Wallace at the 3-4 together if I could.
Well, these are tough decisions. At center, I had Roosevelt Bowie. I don't think anybody realized how good he was. But who was it between at center? Him and Cycli.
Yeah,
right.
Cycli would be the only other candidate, really. Yeah.
So I'd go with Bowie. But you know what? I like what you said, Vert, because one of the things that hurt about this was leaving Wallace out. I'm going to go with that. I'm going to put Wallace at 4 and Coleman at 5 on this team. Now, let me ask you this. Does that team that we just put together beat this St. John's team? Because I think that the line might be St. John's by like 1.5.
No, I don't agree.
Chris Mullen, one of the greatest college basketball players ever.
Yeah, and he's the only spot that they're better.
He's the only guy that's advantageous to St. John's in this lineup.
Yeah,
I would agree with that.
All right, well, hey, I'm not going to argue with you guys. I'll take Syracuse.
And Walter Berry's a great player, but Derek Coleman was the #1 draft pick. And
long left arm of the law. I remember we got him at 5 though, going up against Zen and Hamilton. We got Wallace against Berry, but.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The point of this exercise, I think, is to say, geez, some great players, in this rivalry that's going to be renewed on Sunday. But it's tough to call a rivalry because as of late, as we talked about, we've dominated. But it's going to be a fun game on Sunday. Maybe some of these guys will be in attendance. Probably not.
Wallace will be there, I bet.
Yeah.
Not the St. John's guys.
Yeah, it'd be fun if the guys came to this game like they would go to the Garden for the Big East tournament, since they obviously aren't probably going to travel en masse to Greensboro, North Carolina.
Well, it's our only shot to play in the Garden this year. I'm sure a lot of Syracuse fans are going to turn out, and should be a good atmosphere. You know who's calling the game? You guys know?
Hopefully Raftery. That may be the only chance we've got.
He is, but it's on Fox Sports.
I don't care what channel I got to tune it in. If it's Raftery.
It's Gus Johnson and Bill Raftery.
Gus Johnson, that's the best case scenario right there.
It is, but I don't know if anybody realized you're not going to be seeing Raftery, Billis, and McDonough this year.
Which sucks.
Yeah, Raftery's on Fox Sports, but Gus Johnson, Raftery, that's an interesting pairing. And it should
I've seen a couple of their games. They do a decent job. I mean, Gus is excitable, and Raft is Raft, and we love him, and I miss him.
Yeah, I haven't heard him call a game yet, so Sunday should be great. It's a national game for Fox Sports 1. And let's move to our power rankings. We don't always stick with the AP poll when we give our top 5, and I got Villanova at 5 just like I did last week. They're undefeated. I thought about putting UConn in there too. There's a team that's not getting much respect, who's had a nice little season so far. And actually, you can look at the Big East as a whole, although UConn's in the American Athletic Conference. But this iteration of the Big East is outperforming the ACC right now in the polls.
Yeah.
You look at old Big East, they've got 4 of the top 10.
With Louisville, UConn, Villanova.
Syracuse.
And yeah, man, Syracuse, if it wasn't for them being in the ACC would be off to a horrible start. With Duke and North Carolina having 2 losses each.
Yep.
But I guess we don't get to debate the old Big East versus ACC anymore like we used to. But I root for the Big East teams. I root for Duke and Carolina to lose. I'm not there yet. I don't have that much conference pride. But I will be rooting for Florida State in the national championship game for football.
Yeah.
Mainly because I don't want the SEC to win again. And obviously that's going to be good for Syracuse. So I got Villanova 5.
Florida State was playing somebody like Stanford, I'm not sure we'd be pro ACC necessarily.
I think I would. Football's a different story. I'm kind of glad
Syracuse sucks in football. So
we're going to a bowl.
Yeah, great.
We finished in third in our conference. Third or
was it? I don't even know.
The ACC football conference isn't that great either, but yeah, we beat Boston College. We're tied with them in the same division, and we finished only behind Florida State and Clemson. So, right away, people were saying that Syracuse football couldn't compete in the ACC. Well, there we are, 500 in conference, But we're talking basketball power rankings. Villanova 5, undefeated Ohio State 4. Oklahoma State, even though they suffered a loss, I still got them 3. I got Arizona 2, and I got the Cuse 1. Because if we played Arizona, we're going to beat them. What do you got, Verk?
Got Michigan State 5. I still think they got the best team in the country.
They look like crap, though,
know.
against Carolina.
Yeah, they did. But I just like the talent they got. Wisconsin 4. They've been playing well. And
Talk about Wisconsin.
They've been really beating teams pretty good. Ohio State 3, undefeated. Syracuse 2, Arizona 1.
How about you, Brad?
I have Ohio State 5, Michigan State 4, Syracuse 3, Wisconsin 2, Arizona 1. I bumped Wisconsin up. They've been beating teams and beating them handily, and they've actually been scoring points, which is surprising for them. And I've been impressed. I can't get them to number 1 yet, but they're getting it done.
Jumped them over the Cuse, though, huh?
Yeah.
All right. It's your prerogative. It's your power rankings.
I guess I'm not as optimistic with the Syracuse team quite yet.
I'm sold, baby.
Be a top 10 team.
I'm sold. So, all right. Moving ahead, bold predictions. Last week, I predicted B.J. Johnson would score 15 points versus Binghamton, but he went 0 for 5 shooting and had 0. I'm 2 and 3 on my bold predictions. Brad predicted last week that Baylor would beat Kentucky, and they did. So Brad moves to 2 and 3 on the year. Verk said Syracuse will be undefeated when Duke comes to the Dome, so we're going to have to sit tight on that one. Verk's 1 and 2 on the year. So this week, my bold prediction is that Jeremy Grant will have a career high against St. John's on Sunday in Madison Square Garden. That means he's going to score 20. He's got it one of these days, and I think it'll be Sunday. What do you got? What's your guys' bold predictions this week?
I'm going to go with Raheem Christmas has more blocks than the leading shot blocker in the nation for St. John's.
Well, that's a bold prediction I could see coming true. I like that one, Verk. How about you, Brad?
My bold prediction is by this time next week, Syracuse will be the number 1 ranked team in the country.
Who you got Arizona losing to? Because they ain't going to jump us over until they lose.
Arizona's going to lose to Michigan on Saturday.
Okay.
That's bold, Brad.
And Syracuse will, of course, beat St. John's.
Well, there we go. We'll check and see how we did next week. Coming up at 10:57 Eastern time here. We're going to try to keep this show to an hour. That means it's time for 2 for the road. What are the keys to victory against St. John's? What do we got to do to beat St. John's?
I think just do what we've done all year. Play good defense and get great play from our guards and, have C.J. Fair be C.J. Fair. I don't think we got to do anything special. How
about you, Bram?
I don't know if you guys saw what St. John's did to Fordham the other night.
They killed them.
Tore them apart, and they shot 66% from the field. They shot 60% from 3. So this team, in order to win this game, has to extend that zone and get out on the shooters. Because these guys can shoot.
I think that's one thing we haven't been doing.
They do that. If they do what they did against Fordham against this team, it could be a long night.
We do. I agree, Brad. We got to get out on the shooters. It's the most important thing. It's one thing that one weakness in the zone I've seen. We tend not to challenge some shots, especially late in the shot clock when they're going up. Get out there, get on them. No easy shots, no open shots, even if they're deep shots. We got to get out there on them. So, what's your prediction? Syracuse St. John's. I think we're going to win by 12. I'm going to say it's going to be 76-64. Syracuse wins.
I'll go Cuse by 14, 80-66. Is that 14?
Yep. What do you got, Brad, for a score?
Big prediction. Syracuse will beat St. John's 74-59. 15-point victory in Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, so we all got them in there, double digits, but not a blowout. We'll have to make a few free throws down the stretch. But that's kind of how we've been played against all the, except for Indiana, who we rolled. But against the teams in Maui, they hung around and we kind of closed them out late, and that really gave me some confidence in this team with a young backcourt to be able to pull out those close games. Not that they were close coming home, but we had to protect a small lead. And I think the same type of situation against St. John's. I don't think St. John's is going to roll over. I don't think we're gonna beat them by 20. I think we're going to have to earn it, but I think at the end of the day we will. So,
guys, I mentioned that St. John's Fordham game. Did you see anything from that game at all?
I didn't see any highlights, but I saw they won by 50.
Yeah. So you remember when Syracuse played Fordham? John Sevier was a freshman, and he was probably the leading scorer. He may have had 19, 20 points against Syracuse.
Mm-hmm.
He's the leading freshman scorer in the country. He's averaging like 22 a game. He shot in that game 1 for 21.
Jesus.
He was 0 for 16 from 2-point. He had one three-pointer.
It's hard to do.
From 2
You throw 16 shots up, one of them's got to drop.
21 shots.
Yeah.
One for 21?
1 for 21 from the field. That's a pretty tough night.
Maybe we're in trouble Sunday. You know?
Let's hope nobody turns into John Sevier on Sunday afternoon.
Well, guys, good show. Another one in the books. When we come back next week, we'll be able to talk about St. John's game, and it'll be 1 week closer to Christmas. Any parting shots?
Go Cuse.
Look for number 1 next week.
Go Michigan, right, Bram?
Yeah, go Michigan.
All right. Well,
be number 1. We want that bullseye on our back.
Hey, why not? Why not? It'll make for great future trivia when we ask about the last time Syracuse was ranked number 1.
We're talking.
Well, thanks, everybody, for joining us here on the Upstate Orange Podcast. You can subscribe to our feed on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, or via RSS at podcast.fingerlakes1.com/upstate hoops. We'll be back next Thursday night at 10 p.m. For my co-hosts, Brad Connor, Matt Verkey, and our producer, Jeremy Hunt, I'm Jim Sinacropi. Have a great week, and let's go Orange.